Welcome to the Consciousness Anywhere and Everywhere podcast. I am Shannon O'Hara, and I invite you to a completely new world of possibilities. Hello, and welcome forward to Mental Disorders and Entities. If you are tuning in to this entity-focused episode of the Consciousness Anywhere podcast, and you are entity curious, please note that we are coming to the tail end of a year of Talk to the Entities specialty focuses on the Consciousness Anywhere podcast. My name is Shannon O'Hara. I created something called Talk to the Entities 20 plus years ago. And we have taken this space over the last year to unpack and refocus and share the different aspects of how entities can show up in our lives, how to work with them, how to be more conscious, and how to ultimately facilitate the expansion and growth of awareness in this area. If something in here pings you, please check out the full class that this conversation comes from. There is endless not endless, but many resources in the Talk to the Entities shop and on the Talk to the Entities website, for those of you guys that know you need to learn more. And today's conversation is coming at the tail end of the specialty focuses because they have progressed in what I would call requirement of awareness demand. Mental disorders and entities is obviously and can be a very charged, sensitive, and controversial subject. I need to state right up front, I am not a doctor. I am not a certified therapist. I am not certified by any recognized This Reality board of anything. This is strictly anecdotal, and my tools, the information that I've used, and the successes that I've had using the tools of Access Consciousness and Talk to the Entities in this specific area. I assert that most likely in the future, I don't know how far in the future, entities will become a far more recognized and valid area of psychotherapy. And that will be a great relief to many. For one of the mental disorders and entities, Talk to the Entities statements I like to make is, what would it take to educate rather than medicate? So the basic premise of this conversation is that what if people who say they hear voices are in fact hearing voices, and that's not wrong and creepy and bad and means that they're crazy. It means that they're aware and hearing entities and have probably never been educated, empowered, or taught to talk to entities. And when an entity capacity, which I'm going to talk a lot more about entity capacities, when an entity capacity is invalidated, and I feel like saying invalidated is almost not giving it enough clout because sometimes we are so psychologically tortured based on no one will acknowledge what we're aware of, but we're also told by people who are supposed to care for us the most, protect us the most, be there for us the most. I say supposed to in like sort of like air quotes, that we're told that we're wrong or that we're crazy or that we're stupid or don't ever talk about that again, or all of these psychological walls and refusals that so many of our awarenesses run into very early on in life. And this is not a conversation about how our parents fucked us up at all. This is a conversation about the choice that you have today to claim and own what you know. And I hope this helps. So mental disorders has to be defined, and I'm not going to define it in a clinical or disreality way. I'm going to define it by what I mean by mental disorders. So some of those are the disreality diagnosis, multiple personality, schizophrenia, borderline personality, depression, et cetera, et cetera. So there are clinical diagnoses that get approved by a board of some sort of psychological people who are supposed to be the gods of what is acceptable in the medical field of psychotherapy. Obviously, this is an evolving science that changes greatly over time, like all science. And what we're dealing with, if we look through the lens of consciousness, is so much faster and so much more advanced than what this reality can diagnose. And oftentimes, this reality, or the doctors, psychological and physiological doctors, are diagnosing in order to be able to prescribe drugs. So you have to be diagnosed as ADD or depressed or multiple personality or schizophrenic, so on and so forth, to receive the right drug treatment. And that is a whole other conversation that I'm not going to have. But what we have to look at is, if you're somebody who is aware of entities, or you know somebody, or you're raising somebody who is aware of entities, and that has never been acknowledged, that right there is the first seed of the beginning of awareness appearing as insanity. And so really, this is a self-empowerment, self-choice conversation, because we cannot change others, and we cannot, trying to change the way everybody thinks about this is so much harder and so much less effective than you acknowledging what you know. And that your voice, your awareness, your willingness to know what you know, even in the face of society or your family or your friends not agreeing with you and or even telling you you're crazy, is a step in a very powerful direction. If we do not have the tools of entity awareness, which is what Talk to the Entities is, it is literally the education that everybody ought to be given from day one about entities. It's the first step is acknowledging that entities exist. Like, this sometimes is a massive step for some people, but once that step has finally been made, they exist. Okay, cool. So what do we do with this world of awareness? And that's where the other tools of clearing, communicating, receiving, and cooperating come into play. And so if you're somebody, and the remainder of this conversation will be, I will be directing this if you are somebody who is entity aware, rather than always classifying it as, or you know somebody. Just obviously, if you know somebody and this doesn't apply to you, just this doesn't apply to you. So if you're somebody who is entity aware, now how do you know if you're entity aware? Number one, because you hear voices. This is a very common expressed thing that so many people talk about. Well, I heard this voice, or the voices are telling me. And that's true. You're literally hearing entities when you say you hear voices. Every single time somebody ever says that they hear voices, whether it's inane, benign, insignificant, crazy, wherever that statement, I hear voices, is coming from, they're talking about entities. So if you're talking to entities and you're hearing entities, what does one do with that? Well, first of all, one must recognize they are hearing entities. I feel like this is blatantly obvious, but obviously just acknowledging, yes, I'm aware of entities and entities exist, can be such a gigantic leap of reality transformation for so many people, which is what I find so exciting about getting more conscious through the interaction of spirit parts. So yes, acknowledge, okay, I'm aware of entities. The first step is this an entity? Yes or no? Very first step. And then if it is, okay, so let's develop those capacities. And some people are very plagued in a very crazy making way by their awareness of entities. And again, I posit that this is not due to that the entity awareness is bad. It's that the person has either never received an education and oftentimes they've received an anti-education. So essentially, what the two choices that are left from not receiving an education or receiving an anti-education is to suppress, to shut off, to turn off, to cut off that part of you that is aware of entities, which if you can successfully do that, Okay. And then if you can't successfully do that, which does occur, then the entity awareness twists and distorts. And this is what occurred for me when I was a teenager. And this is what occurs for a lot of people who cannot really completely shut the door on entity awareness, because you cannot make an ability and a capacity go away. That's a fact. You can suppress it, you can avoid it, you can reject it, you can barrier against it, you can invalidate it, you could drug it out of existence, but it's still there. And so the more you avoid, reject, etc., the more distorted the capacity becomes, because you start putting these filters or these lenses in the way that distort or twist or pervert the clear flow of information. And when you're channeling energy or information or awareness through a prism of judgment, it's going to get really distorted. Just like when light moves through a crystal, it turns into a rainbow, and energy, information, and consciousness moves through a filter of judgment. It comes out the other side very distorted. Hello, it's me, Shannon, in another outfit, in another time and place and space. If you like these podcasts and you're interested in greater consciousness, I invite you to check out a club that I conduct every month called Club Consciousness. It's a group facilitation session where I have people from all over the world who are seeking greater consciousness who get together to do in-depth dives into what facilitates greater awareness, greater ease, greater possibility, using the tools of Access Consciousness together. This is the kind of place where you surround yourself with people who desire something different, who are willing to use the tools, and who will contribute to more peace, more space for all of us that choose it. Check out Club Consciousness to have more fun. So maybe you know more than you have ever acknowledged that you know. And if you were going to give yourself permission to be weird, to have awareness, and to develop the capacity, what would that change? So when people are not educated and or suppressed, distorted, judged for entity capacities, it can turn into what this reality diagnoses or calls mental disorders or mental health issues. I'm not really even sure what the most woke terminology is at this point, but it is definitely something that we need to question rather than follow the herd for. There is so much more ease in knowing what you know than turning to somebody else to fix you. Now, are all mental disorders or insanity or mental health issues entities? Absolutely not. I am not saying that on any level. I'm staying in my lane. I am talking about this very specific part of it, which may be relevant to some and may not be relevant to others. But again, I just want to remind that if somebody hears voices, that's an entity-related issue. Schizophrenia or multiple personality is literally diagnosed as somebody who expresses or has literally different personalities. This is an entity example, the clearest kind of entity example I could even think of. They're one entity and then they're another entity. Same body, different entities. And is that wrong or bad? Or is that a capacity and ability that they've never been empowered about, taught about, or that they have never really particularly chosen to be very conscious around? And one of something that occurs when somebody is very entity capable. Now, when I say entity capable, I don't just mean one thing. Entity capable can express itself really differently amongst a wide population of people. So the way that I'm entity aware or entity capable might not express itself in the same way as somebody else. So sort of like X-Men, we can have different unique abilities in the entity universe. So when I say entity capable, please note, I don't mean one specific expression. It could be many different expressions, which I will not go into detail here. When somebody is entity aware and not empowered or not being the most dominant entity or not being conscious, other entities can come in who will take charge and will take over. And this is what I find really difficult to work with historically in adults. Because by the time I've had a lot of clients and I've worked with a lot of people who have a range of entity expressed symptoms. And oftentimes by the time somebody is an adult and they've come to work with me, they have already given their power to and submitted to other entities so dynamically that they are really not the ones calling the shots anymore. So the skill really becomes in knowing how to work with a multiple entity person. And the key here, which is the key, each of us has a choice. And if we include awareness and infinite possibility as a reality, so I don't mean like we imagine we're aware. I mean, we are aware. And then what spectrum of possibility does that open up our psychological landscape, our consciousness, our world, our reality to? And in a world of awareness, what would be included? Well, everything would be included in a world of awareness. And is that wrong? Is that scary? Is that too hard to handle? If you were an infinite being, would there be anything you couldn't handle, be aware of? And for me, this is very exciting, for I love greater awareness. And greater awareness isn't always rainbows and sunshine. Greater awareness is the inclusion of all awareness. And this might be the awareness of malevolent beings who will disempower. This might be the awareness of a level of judgment or abuse that we sustain that breaks our being. And in that breaking of the being, we introduces this susceptibility to the kinds of entities that would disempower and reach for unconsciousness or anti-consciousness, because those kinds of entities exist just like those kinds of people exist. So when we're having this conversation about mental disorders and entities, or when we're having, really, in my opinion, any conversation about consciousness and greater awareness, I like to use the definition that Gary Douglas states about consciousness, which is that the definition of consciousness is it includes everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, and it judges nothing. So if we can empower ourselves with the freedom to judge nothing, it gives us so much more scope and range of function in all of these infinite, magical, weird ways that life exists. And if you've been living a very, I don't know, I guess I could call it like normal life. I'm not even really sure what that means to you, but a life that, I guess, you're living a normal life when you are extremely concerned about fitting in and wanting other people to approve of you and to not be too different. This is obviously not a conversation for that person. This is a conversation for the person who knows they're different and wants to lean into that difference because the difference is a value, a commodity for consciousness, and the key to access greater possibility. And that's really what Talk to the Entities can be, is a commodity to access greater possibility. Talking to entities, dealing with entities, clearing entities, working with entities is remarkably empowering. Like, it is, I was shocked in the beginning how much more of myself I got when I was willing to finally deal with entities, because it was something that I really rejected and avoided in my teens. Not even that consciously. I just sort of knew that it was weird. I didn't want to be weird. I didn't want my friends to think I was a freak. I wanted to fit in. And I just sort of like bit by bit shut off or tried to shut out what made me different. And when I got to be in my late teens, that choice had a high price. I was severely depressed and suicidal, which is a side effect of unacknowledged and can be a side effect of unacknowledged and undealt with entity awareness. So I chose to turn towards awareness, which was not really even that easy at the time, but the choice was either be miserable and die or get more aware. And I was so blessed, and am still so blessed, to be having direct access to the tools of Access Consciousness. They really helped me access more consciousness. And in the accessing of more consciousness, all the parts and pieces of me that I had shut out and turned away became more available again. And that was entity stuff. And I, through the support of my stepfather, Gary Douglas, learned how to work with entities. And it has been literally, on every level, one of the most rewarding choices of my life. Or it is a great gift to be aware. And entities, when you know what you're dealing with, can be a great contribution. And also knowing what entities are not a great contribution, and knowing how to deal with those entities, and knowing how to empower yourself to be the most dominant entity, to not listen to the voices of disempowerment, whether they're coming from entities or they're coming from the people around you, which are like entities with bodies. So what education, what empowerment will give you greater access to your power? And that really becomes the whole other conversation about if you want to be empowered. Because if you've been judging entity awareness, or you've had many lifetimes of being judged, condemned, cursed, criticized, and I mean criticized like on the deepest level, like if your safety, if your like your place within the clan, your place within the family was unsafe, if you talked about entities, or if you were different, or if you brought that up, if your like the safety of your life and your belonging was threatened if you were different, starting to claim and own your power in an awareness arena, like with entities, that can feel like a very impossible choice, due to that you've been told that it's unsafe, that you're deeply wrong for being aware of entities, and you will be rejected. And that, unfortunately, is something that does exist. I don't know if I really mean unfortunately. It's sort of like oneness includes everything, including assholes. But do you have a choice? And this is the thing where your choice creates. And when you're ready, when it's time, I hope you check out the Talk to the Entities body of work if this is a relevant conversation for you. Mental Disorders and Entities was a 3-part specialty class that I facilitated probably 8 years ago, maybe something like that, 8 years ago, in conjunction with a lot of the other Talk to the Entities specialties. And you can find that in the Talk to Entity shop. Later on this month, I'm also going to be hosting Anthony Mattis and Julia Sotis for a Talk to the Entities roundtable. Anthony Mattis is a Talk to the Entities facilitator, and Julia is a ex-Talk to the Entities facilitator, but they are married, and Anthony has a lot of direct experience with mental disorders and entities. His first wife had all of the stuff that I talked about earlier in this podcast, and he went through quite a journey with that as she wound up killing herself. So he really was able to, once he learned the tools, there was a lot more peace and freedom that came from him. I'll let him tell the story. But if this is an area of interest to you, please tune into that. Please know that you are not alone. You do not have to live in a bunker of wrongness and shame or be controlled if you don't want to. We invite you to a world of greater possibility and the joy that awareness can be. Choice creates. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your interest in something different. How does it get infinitely better than this? And what would it take to shift, change, transform, and facilitate all entities and energies with total ease? See you guys later. Thank you for listening to this show. My target is to make consciousness easy to find and choose. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes and share this with somebody who you know who might be looking for more consciousness in their life. You can visit me on Shannon-O'Hara.com or talktotheentities.com. And to learn more about the amazing tools of Access Consciousness, you can visit accessconsciousness.com and be sure to subscribe to the podcast.